Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody, we live in very strange times. That's no exaggeration. Yesterday we had Nick Bryant on the show, the author of The Forever War. He was the BBC's man in Washington, D.C. for a long time. And in our conversation, Nick suggested that we're living in really historic times, equivalent to the fall of the Berlin Wall, 9/11, perhaps even the beginnings of the Second World War. My guest today, like Nick, is a man who is a deep thinker. Tim Wu will be very well known to you for many things, including his book, The Attention Merchants. He was involved in the Biden White House. He teaches law at Columbia University and many other things. He has a new book coming out later in the year, on November 4th, The Age of Extraction. But he has a very interesting essay in this issue of Quarterly, this issue of Liberties, the quarterly magazine of ideas. It's called The Real Road to Serfdom. Tim had a couple of interesting tweets in the last couple of days. One comparing the behavior of President Trump to Germany's 1933 Enabling Act. And when it comes to Ukraine, Tim wrote, how does the GOP feel about their president's evident plan to forfeit the Cold War? Tim Wu is joining us from his home in the village of Manhattan. Tim, welcome. Before we get to your excellent essay in Liberties, The Real Road to Serfdom, how would you historicize what we're living through at the moment?
You know, I think the 1930s are not the wrong way to look at it. You know, prior to that period, you had this extraordinary concentration of economic power in a very fragile environment in a lot of countries. You had an enormous crash, and you had the rise of populist leaders, sort of Mussolini being the pioneer of the model. And you know, it's gotten that's been going on for at least 5-6 years now. And you know, we're kind of in that middle period where it's moving away from people just winning elections to trying to really alter the constitution of their country. So I think the mid-30s is probably about right.
You were involved in the Biden administration. You were one of the major thinkers when it came to antitrust. Have you been surprised with what's happened since Biden left office, the speed, the radicalness, or the seeming radicalness of this Trump administration?
Yes, because I think I expected something more like the first one, which was more of a show and you know, a lot of flash, but poor execution. This time around, the execution is also in a way poor, but more effective. And I also didn't fully expect, I don't know who expected that Elon Musk would actually be a government official at this point, and that he'd you know, have this sort of vandalism project going on. So yeah, those things were a little unexpected. You know, the fact they won all of the houses of Congress was part of the problem, and I think has made the effort, frankly, go faster.
You talk about Musk. We've done many shows on Musk's role in all this and the seeming arrival of Silicon Valley, or a certain version of Silicon Valley in Washington, D.C. You're familiar with both worlds, the world of big tech in Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C. Is that your historical reading, that these two worlds are coming together in this second Trump administration?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think it's very natural for economic power to start to seek political power. I think it follows from the basic view of monopoly as a creature that wants to defend itself. And the second observation, that the most effective means of self-defense is control of government. And so, if you sort of follow that very simple logic, it stands to reason that the most powerful economic entities would try to gain themselves power of government. So, if we want to talk about the next 5 years of the tech industry, sort of following the lead of I'll credit Palantir and Peter Thiel for being the sort of pioneers of thinking, as opposed to trying to avoid government, that they should try to control government. I think that is sort of the obvious move over the next 4 years.
And I've been reading all morning your excellent essay in Liberties, the Real Road to Serfdom. When did you write it? Because it seems particularly pertinent this week, although, of course, you wrote it. You didn't write it knowing exactly what was going to be happening with Musk and Washington, D.C. and Trump and Ukraine. When was this written?
About 2 years ago. I think I started writing it right when I got out of the White House. I feel its themes are, it's trying to get to sort of eternal themes about the dangers of economic power and concentrated economic power and its unaccountability. So it is when it was written. I guess if it made predictions that are starting to come true, I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's when I wrote it.
The Real Road to Serfdom is, of course, a reference to the Hayek book, The Road to Serfdom. Did you consciously use that title with reference to Hayek, or was that a Liberties decision?
No, that was my decision. And at a point, and I may still write this, I was thinking of writing a book just called The Real Road to Serfdom. In some ways, I am both fascinated and a fan of Hayek's in certain ways. I think he nailed certain things exactly right, but then he makes these big errors at the same time, and so, or I guess oversights that sort of limit him or limit his prophecies. So, I've sort of always been fascinated with playing around with his ideas. He, to his credit, was very critical of monopoly and very critical of something I just said, the role of the state in reinforcing monopoly, but at a certain almost naivete about what powerful, unaccountable private economic entities would do with their power. So that's essentially my criticism, which I can elaborate on if you want me to.
I think it's in 2018 you wrote a book, The Curse of Bigness. And in a way, this is an essay against bigness, but it's written, or please correct me if I'm wrong, I read it as a critique of the left, suggesting that, there were times in the essay, if you were reading it blind, you could have been reading Hayek in its critique of Marx and centralization and Lenin and Stalin and the Ukrainian famines and all the rest of it. But is the message in the book, Tim, is your audience a progressive audience? Are you saying that it's a mistake to rely on bigness, so to speak, the state as a redistributive platform? Is that a fair summary of the essay?
Not entirely. I'm very critical of communist planned economies, and that's part of it. But it's mainly a critique of libertarian faith in private economic power, or sort of the blindness to the dangers of it. My basic thesis in The Real Road to Serfdom is that free market economies will tend to monopolize. And once monopoly power is achieved, it tends to set off a strong, it will want to extract as much wealth from the rest of the economy as it can, create something closer to a feudal type economy with an underclass. And that tends to create this huge amount of resentment and populist anger, and that democracies have to respond to that anger. And, the sort of libertarian answer of saying, oh, that's fine, this problem will go away is a terrible answer. And that history suggests that what happens instead is, if democracy doesn't do anything, that the state takes over. And the way the state takes over is usually on the back of a populist, a strongman. He could be a communist, could be fascist, could be just sort of a random authoritarian like in South America. But I guess I'd say it's a critique of the right and the left, the right for being blind to the dangers of concentrated economic power, and the left to the extent, I mean, especially the communist left, to sort of idolizing the takeover of vital functions by a giant state, which has a track record as bad, if not worse, than purely private power.
You bring up in the essay Hugo Chavez, the now departed Venezuelan strongman. You're obviously no great fan of his, but you do seem to suggest that Chavez, like so many other authoritarians, is operating his sometime popularity is built on the truth of people's suffering. Is that fair?
That is very fair. I think that's exactly right. In the 90s, when Chavez first came to power through popular election, I think everyone was mystified and thought he was some throwback, to the dictators of the 60s and 70s. But actually, he turned out to be a pioneer of our future, of the new form of autocrat, not entirely unlike the old form of autocrat, whose appeal to the sort of unfairness of the economy post-globalization was very appealing to a large number of people and a path to political power. I mean, I think that leaders like Hungary's leader, to some degree, not really Putin, but certainly Donald Trump, are direct descendants of Hugo Chavez in their approach. They followed the same playbook. They appealed to the same kind of pain and suffering, and they promised the same kind of thing. We're going to really act for you as opposed to the elites and the elites and the foreigners and the immigrants and the people who are running this country. The same basic message. And Chavez is also a lesson. He started in some ways in a way which the population liked. He lowered gas prices. He gave away a lot of money, nationalized industry. He was very popular. But then he, like most autocrats, eventually turned the money to himself and destroyed his own country. So I just think it's a cautionary lesson.
Why do autocrats like Chavez and perhaps Trump, why are they so much better at capturing that anger than Democrats like Joe Biden used to work for, and obviously Kamala Harris, who lost the last election?
Well, I won't say anything bad about the last president. As I think Biden did, in fact, have a sense of people's pain. But I think that it is people who are outside the system, like Chavez, are able to tap into resentment and anger in a way which is less diluted by their direct information environment, their colleagues, their peers. I mean, anyone who hangs around in Washington, D.C. for a long time, and I've been there a long time, just kind of becomes more muted and careful, even though they think they're, speaking to the people. They lose it, and also they lack. You tend to lack credibility. So, I think that said, I'm not supporting the fact that populist strongmen take over countries in distress. I think you need to avoid that level of economic distress in the first place, and begin to fix it and protect the middle class. Happy, contented middle class countries don't tend to see the rise of authoritarian dictators. There isn't some Danish or version of Hugo Chavez in the running right now, even though they may be turning more right wing in some ways. It's nothing like we have here in the United States or Venezuela went through.
You bring up Denmark. Denmark always comes up. Tim, and you know this better than I do in these kinds of conversations. Although I have to say about your essay is you mostly don't fall into the Denmark trap of simply saying, well, why don't we all become like Denmark? But at the same time, you acknowledge that the Denmark model is attractive, but you suggest that we've misunderstood it or treated it in a superficial way, that we need to reinvent ourselves and perhaps most of all in America, to recognize the structural foundations of the Danish experiment, as opposed to simply its taxation policies or investment policies? What can and can't we learn from the Danish model?
Yeah, I think that American liberals often get wrong the lesson of Scandinavia and Denmark and other countries that have strong, prosperous middle classes and upper middle classes, like Taiwan, Japan, Korea. In the case of Scandinavia, the go-to is that it's just, the liberals' favorite set of policies: high taxation, strong social support systems, and so forth. But I think the structure of those economies is much more important. They have, I use one of Jacob Hackard's term, very strong pre-distribution. They've always avoided just having, a small set of monopolists who make all the money and then hopefully hand it out to other people. It all goes back to their land reform in the early 19th century, late 18th century, in the Enlightenment period, where they set up just a very different kind of economy with a broad distribution of productive assets. And I think that, I'm trying to promote a philosophy in this book. You asked, who is this book for? I think it's for people who are fed up with the excesses of laissez-faire capitalism and think it leads to autocracy, but also no fans of communism or socialism. But they need something, they want something to believe in. And, I'm here to say, just saying let people pile up money and we'll tax it later is not actually going to work. What you need is a economy that's structured with a lot of centers of distributed economic power. That may sound complicated, balanced economy, but that's the point of this essay and frankly of my broader projects in life.
And the term that seems to summarize that in the essay and perhaps in your broader projects is, I took this term from the essay, architecture of parity. It's a bit clunky, but is that the best way to sum up your thinking?
I'm working on this. There's a lot of architecture of equality or of parity. I guess it ended up parity in that essay. Decentralized capitalism, distributionism, which is more of a 19th century, frankly, form of Christian or Catholic economics. I think people are grasping around for the right word for an economic system that doesn't rely on just a few giant companies taking money from everybody and hopefully redistributing it. I think that model is broken. I think that model has a dangerous tendency to lead to autocracy. So we need basically a better capitalism. Alternative title for this piece would have been Saving Capitalism from Itself. So that's what I'm trying to talk about.
Yeah, and on the cover, they always seem to change the titles. On the cover of the quarterly, it's on decentralizing capitalism. So you're very much in favor of capitalism. You write about its creative, almost egalitarian potential. Yeah. Is this mostly, though, Tim, your name is most associated with tech, your critique of big tech, or does this get beyond big tech? Are some of the other sectors of the economy you're interested in fixing and reforming? Does it go beyond Silicon Valley?
I think absolutely. I think Silicon Valley is the most obvious and easiest entry point to talk about concentrated economic power. Everyone can see the fact that they have a certain dependence on a small number of platforms and that they have earnings and profits far beyond what anyone imagined possible and have created wealth for individuals. So that's, the easy way to understand it. But I think we are talking about an economy-wide, almost probably a global set of problems. And that is not limited to just the tech industry. Some industries, it's worse, frankly. If I think good examples, meat processing industry in the United States is a horrendously concentrated industry, takes all the money from the farmers, charges us too much for meat, keeps it for itself, highly concentrated. There's a great number of industries. And I think that, people are looking for something to understand or believe in that, as I said before, is different than socialism, but different than sort of this libertarian capitalism that ends up bankrupting a lot of people. So that's what I'm trying to write. This is sort of my ongoing project, And tech is the easiest way to talk about it, but not the be all and end all of my interest.
Are there examples where we're beginning to see decentralized capitalism? The essay was very strong on the critique, but I found less examples of decentralized capitalism in practice outside maybe Denmark in the 2020s.
I think East Asia post-World War II is a strong example of the success. Now, look, there's no economy that is purely small businesses, although Taiwan comes kind of close. But if you look at the East Asian story after World War II, one of the big features of that story was an effort to try to reform land and give land to peasants and create a landowning class to replace the sort of feudal economy system they had. A huge amount of entrepreneurship, especially in Korea and Taiwan, less in Japan, and building of really a strong and prosperous middle and upper middle class. Now, Japan has gone through hard times. Frankly, they let their companies get too big and they stagnated. But Korea and Taiwan have gone from being, third world economies. Actually, Taiwan's wealthier per capita now than Japan. And, I take the United States as another strong example. I didn't have time in this essay to detail it, but the United States has vacillated and varied between being very big and very small. And even at its biggest, it still has a strong entrepreneurial culture, still has sectors that have a lot of small entities. So, Germany is another good example, frankly, now that I get into it. And there's no exactly perfect version. But what I'm saying is that the model of monopolized economies and the model of just having a few winners and hoping that everybody else can get tax payments somehow is really a loser.
You were on Chris Hayes recently talking about antitrust. Does this make, and I mean, you're one of America's leading thinkers on antitrust, and also you were brought in to the Biden administration on the antitrust front. Is antitrust then the heart of the matter, Tim? Is this really the key to decentralizing capitalism?
I think that it's a big tool. It is one of the tools of managing the economy. It works when it works by preventing industries from merging their way into monopoly and keeps a careful eye on structure. So I think it's, in the same way that no one would say that interest rates are the be all and end all of monetary policy. When we're talking about structural policy, which I guess this is what this is, having the antitrust dial actively, or the antitrust law actively preventing overconcentration is important. But in the White House itself, when I was there, I was very big, and we spent a lot of time trying to get other agencies to try to prevent their sectors, whether it was like healthcare or transportation, from just becoming overly monopolized and extractive as well. So I don't think it's sort of one law. I think you can have a lot of parts of the government. The antitrust agencies are key. And I'll also say, well, maybe I'll leave it there.
Yeah, you wrote an interesting piece for The Atlantic about Biden's antitrust initiatives. You said the outgoing president's legacy of revived antitrust enforcement won't be easy to undo. Trump is very good at breaking things. Why is it going to be hard to undo? Lena Khan's gone, the woman who seems to unite all of Silicon Valley. Everyone seems to dislike her, for better or worse. What did Biden do to protect antitrust legislation?
I mean, I think it's one thing are the legal patterns have changed, and the cases are ongoing. But I think the standards have changed. I think more important is a change of consciousness and a change of ideology and a change in popular support. I don't think there is a great amount of support for saying, well, let's let, for example, big tech, do whatever they want and have no problems. Look, there's people who obviously believe in that, and some of them have influence in this administration, and I would not be surprised to see an effort. But I think there's, as I said, been a real change in consciousness. I note that the Federal Trade Commission has already announced that it's going to stick with the Biden administration's merger rules. And we haven't heard from Justice Department, but my strong sense is they'll do the same. So, there are a lot of things that Trump did that we stuck with in the Biden administration because they were popular. The most obvious being the turn to China, and a sense that it was overdue. And I think going back to the Bush era, we're never going to bother any monopolists. I just don't think there's an appetite for it.
Why is Lena Khan, and you know her obviously quite well, why is she so unpopular in Silicon Valley?
It's sort of funny. More than one reason, I think. Maybe because she enforced the law the way it was meant to be.
Maybe also because she's a woman. I think that.
Well, just on that topic, I'm not usually one to say that it's all based on sexism or anything, but the actual fact is that the Justice Department brought more cases against big tech than her, and there's a guy, Jonathan Cantor, who ran and Justice Antitrust. It's kind of like a test. And he's the one who won the case against Google, and his Justice Department was trying to break up Google. They may still do it, but somehow Lena Khan was the face of it. I think because she's young, good-looking, a woman, just like Jonathan Cantor. I don't know. It's a good. I think that's it. It just became a symbol of things.
You bring up the AT&T and IBM cases in the US tech narrative in the essay, suggesting that we can learn a great deal from them. Not everyone will be familiar with what happened with the breakup of the original AT&T and IBM. What can we learn from those cases, Tim?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I feel that the United States, in support of my theory that you need to balance the economy. The United States, from the 70s through, frankly, the 2010s, was an extraordinarily innovative place and did amazing things in the tech industry. And I think that was important. A really important part of that was challenging the big IBM and AT&T monopolies. AT&T was broken into 8 pieces. IBM was forced to begin selling its software separately and opened up the software markets to what became a new software industry. AT&T earlier had been forced to license the transistor, which opened up semiconductor industry, also to some degree opened the computing industry. They had to stay out of computing. So the government intervened pretty forcefully, kind of a form of industrial policy to weaken its tech monopolists. And the lesson is maybe we need to do the same thing right now. Some people will say, and you're going to ask about this, well, what about China or so forth? But I think the United States has always done the best when it constantly challenges established power and creates room for entrepreneurs to take their shot. I want very much for the new AI companies to challenge the main tech platforms and see what comes of that, as opposed to just becoming, sort of a stagnant industry. Everyone says nothing can become stagnant, but the aerospace industry was pretty quick moving in the 60s, and now you have Boeing and Airbus sort of sitting there. It's very easy for a tech industry to stagnate, and I think attacking the monopolists is the best way to prevent that.
You mentioned Google earlier. You had an interesting op-ed in the New York Times last year about what we should do about Google. I should mention that my wife is head of litigation at Google, so I'm not entirely disinterested on this front, although I also have a career as a critic of Google.
That's an interesting.
So, if Kent Walker was here, he would acknowledge some of the things he was saying. Kent Walker, of course, being head of legal at Google, very senior guy. But he would say Google's still innovating. Google hasn't become Boeing. It's innovating in AI. It's innovating in self-driving cars. It's shifting search to AI. Would he be entirely wrong?
No, he wouldn't be entirely wrong. In the same way that IBM kept going, AT&T kept going. What I think is what you want in tech industries is you want a fair fight. And the problem with Google is obviously isn't that they're investing in AI or trying to build self-driving cars. I think that's great. The problem is that they were paying over $20 billion a year to Apple for a promise not to compete in search. They were trying, and through control of the browsers and many other things, trying to make sure that they could never be dislodged. And, my view of the economics is monopolists need to always be a little insecure. They need to be in a position where they never feel they can be challenged, they're beyond being challenged. That happens. There's companies who sort of, AT&T in the 70s or the 60s felt that it was sort of immune. There was nothing anyone could do to them, and it took the government to make space. So, I think it's very important for there to be opportunities to challenge the big guys and try and seize their pie.
I'm curious where you are on Section 230. It doesn't come up in this essay, but you've obviously written about it and given it a great deal of thought. Google, and my wife was actually involved in this, she won her Supreme Court case when it came to Section 230. And in this sense, I'm guessing you view Google as being on the side of the good guys.
Section 230 is interesting. I think that in the early days of the internet, it was an important kind of, I'll use jargon, infant industry kind of thing. It was an insulation that was very important to get those little companies at the time, give them an opportunity to grow and build business models, because if you're being sued by millions of people, you can't really do too much. I think when they began to be less, 230 was originally designed to protect people like AOL, who, if anyone remembers AOL, people who run, user forums and have millions of people discussing, kind of like Reddit. I think the more that Google and companies like Facebook became active in promoting materials and became more like media companies, the case for an absolutist 230 became a lot weaker. So, I think the 230 didn't really change, but I think the companies changed.
You mentioned you wrote the essay in Liberties, the Real Road to Serfdom, a couple of years ago. You also talked a little bit earlier about AI. There's not a lot of AI in this, but the more I read it, the more I thought about AI. I saw a number recently. I couldn't find where I found it, so maybe it's slightly anecdotal, but 50% of all the investment in technology over the last year was in AI, and most of that has gone into these huge platforms, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google Gemini, and so on. Is AI now the central theater, if you like, potentially, both in the real road to serfdom and in liberating ourselves from big tech?
That's a great question. So I'll say 2 years ago, when I was writing this, I was determined not to say anything that looks stupid about AI later. There's a lot more on what I think about AI in my new book coming in November.
Yeah, I can imagine. The Age of Extraction.
Yeah, there is a lot more about it. I see AI as a classic potential successor technology. It obviously is the most significant successor technology to, let's just say, the web and the mass internet 20 years ago, in terms of having could displace things like search, could change the way people do various forms of productivity and so forth. So I think it has great potential. I think that how technology plays out depends a lot, quite obviously, on the economic structure. If you think about a technology like the cotton gin, just take an extreme example, it didn't automatically lead to a broad flourishing, but enforced plantation slavery or reinforced that model. So what I think should happen with AI, or I hope happens, is that it sets off more competition, more destabilization for some of the tech platforms, as opposed to reinforcing their advantage and sort of locking them in forever. I don't know if we know what's going to happen right now. I think there are new companies. I think it's extremely important that OpenAI stays separate from the existing tech companies, because if this just becomes the same guys over and over again absorbing technology, that sounds a lot like the darker or the less productive chapters in U.S. tech history.
And what about the power of AI to, so to speak, liberate ourselves from our brain power as the next industrial revolution? And in that sense, when I was reading the essay, I thought to myself that it would be a very good model, both as a warning and in terms of offering potential for us to create this new architecture of parity. Because the technology in itself, in theory at least, or at least in the language of Silicon Valley, is one of parity. It's one of democratizing brain power.
Yes, I agree with that. I think it has extraordinary potential. I think things can go effectively in two directions, and I think history is a good guide. You know, the Industrial Revolution, to my mind, at least for short, long term, had some good. Let me re-say that. The Industrial Revolution, I think, is one example where you had more of a huge transition and more of a top-down centralization of the means of production. And to my mind, was very bad for a lot of people. Ultimately, in the longer term, they gained, but there was a lot of suffering along the way. I would hope it'd be something more like the PC revolution in the 80s and 90s, which did, in fact, augment individual humanity as opposed to, sort of collective enterprise. It allowed a lot of people to do things like, start their own travel agency or something with just a computer, or their accounting firm or things like that. So I am interested and bullish on the potential of AI to, empower smaller units, but I'm concerned and worried that it will be used to reinforce existing economic structures. I think jury's out, or the future will tell us. I don't think, just hoping that it's going to make humanity better is going to be the best answer.
Yeah, and when you were writing this essay, of course, this was just as the AI revolution was getting going with OpenAI, ChatGPT. Web3 was still in vogue, and the idea of blockchain and crypto decentralizing the economy. But I didn't see any references, and maybe I missed them, to Web3 and the role of technology in democratizing capitalism in terms of the architecture of corporations, for example. Are you a skeptic on the Web3 ideology?
If you mean by Web3 cryptocurrency.
Well, but also distributed companies decentralizing everything from currencies to corporations.
Yeah, not entirely. So I have a lot more on blockchain and Web3 in the book as well. The essay had a limit, and I was also talking about 18th century Denmark and things like that. I've been, so the challenge with particularly, let's just talk about for a minute about the decentralization capacity of crypto and Bitcoin. Bitcoin both overpromises in large part, but then delivers something. So I've been very interested in crypto and blockchain for a very long time. Obviously, the challenge it's had is constantly promising to decentralize various systems and failing, and then people stealing billions of dollars and ending up in prison. So it has a sort of dubious track record. But it does have this core potential for a certain class of people, at least, to earn money. And I'm always in favor of anything that is an alternative means of earning money that's different than what's going on. There are people who made money on it, and I just think it's failed to execute on its promises. Let's put it that way. Particularly blockchain. Blockchain has. You can bet pretty well on Polymarket, but the hope that it was going to be a real challenge to the Web2 technologies hasn't panned out.
Sure, as you say, Hayek inspired the book, and in some senses his intellectual ghost. There's more on Hayek than there is in Keynes. The father of decentralization in ideological terms was, of course, E.F. Schumacher. Mm-hmm. I don't think you reference him, But do you think that there has been a lot of thinking since Schumacher on the value of smallness, on decentralized architectures? What do people like yourself add to what Schumacher kind of missed in his, I guess, his critique of bigness?
You know, Schumacher is a good example. Rawls is actually
yeah, you mentioned Rawls also,
who I think in some ways is under-recognized as being interested in these things. I mean, what I think I want to add, I see myself as writing in the tradition of those figures in trying to pursue a political economy that values a more balanced economy, small production. And I think hopefully what I add to it is sort of a level of institutional experience and at some level practicality that was missing. Just take Rawls as slightly unfair because he's a philosopher, but his model doesn't include firms; it's just individuals. So it's all about balancing between poor people and rich people, when obviously economic power is also held by corporations. So I'm trying to create and put more flesh on the bones of a philosophy, small is beautiful philosophy, frankly, and political economy that is a little less starry-eyed, a little more realistic, and frankly puts forward the point that you're not sacrificing growth and you're taking a lot less political risk with a more balanced economy. I just think there's an adulation of bigness in our time, and exciting. Big companies are exciting and glamorous, but I think long-term prosperity does better when you have a lot of centers, a more balanced system. I'm not an ultra decentralist. Like, I'm not suggesting we should live in mud huts and return to making our own clothes by ourselves or something. But I do think the worship of monopoly is very similar to the worship of autocracy and is very dangerous.
Yeah, you mentioned political economy. It's an essay on decentralizing capitalism as opposed to decentralizing democracy. But does the decentralization of politics need to move hand in hand with the decentralization of capitalism? Lots of initiatives from citizen assemblies to local government and all sorts of other redistributed power. Do the two go hand in hand, Tim? Can you get to a decentralized capitalism without a decentralized democracy?
Well, you may need a state powerful enough to fight concentrated economic power. But I'm overall of the view that the greatest evil in human history has always been perpetrated by overly powerful governments. I just think that overly powerful. So in a way, I'm agreeing with you. Whether whether this means you need more town hall meetings, I don't know. But I think that giant countries with power centralized in one point are obviously what we need to avoid. I think when I was younger, I was more into the federal. I worked for the federal government many times, and I was more into federal power. But I've started to appreciate, and I think we're going to have a strong appreciation over the next couple of years of the need for some form of resistance in small political units, and the dangers of it all being in the hands of one individual or a couple individuals. I mean, China, Russia, and the United States are all flashing in dangerous ways. And, empire, monarchy, dictatorship, those are the worst things of all. So is that the easy way of making the case for decentralization? Yes.
You mentioned FDR. FDR always comes up in these kinds of essays. But are we, and you seem to be implying this, Tim, are we beyond the FDR moment in terms of the need for centralized government or the role of centralized government? Do we perhaps need a new political party? We had the Greens in Europe in the late 20th century, which had some success. Might the Democrats need to reinvent themselves, or might thinkers like yourself need to move on and create new parties that rethink economic and political power in the 21st century?
We're talking about the United States. I think it's a challenging undertaking to build political parties from scratch. And the last 40 years have shown that what most people do is rebuild them from the inside, and that's a more effective approach. FDR, I think, is also slightly misunderstood, or at least he's a very flexible guy. He began as a sort of fan, advised, but unfortunately by Columbia professors who had very Soviet-influenced ideas like Rex Tugwell. He believed at first in sort of a centralized planning model, but he reversed course in the late 30s and went much further towards an antitrust, and we need to have a much more balanced economy approach. So I think he's misremembered, frankly. When we, in the early days of Biden administration, when we started the antitrust program, we convinced President Biden that, that FDR's true legacy lay in standing up to big business and trying to balance the economy. Now, you have to have a government that at least is as strong as private entities. You can't be entirely overwhelmed. I've worked in state government too, and state government sometimes can be too weak. But yeah, so the basic thing, though, I do believe, I'm not starting a new party, but I do think we need to fortify and double down on a political ideology that has a vision of what a balanced economy looks like. And I think the left and right have been too complicit in the idea of just allowing power to aggregate and hoping for the best. And the left saying we'll have taxation and the right saying it'll trickle down. People got mad and they turned to autocratic figures. And we need a philosophy and a political economy program that doesn't let that happen again.
But in a sense, some people might read this essay and think when the smoke's cleared, he's really calling for a return to Clinton Blair centrism and a focus on capitalism, small-scale capitalism, and hard work. Is there a danger? Maybe that's not a danger. Should we be perhaps even rethinking the Blairite Clintonian response to
I don't think I'm a Blairite
neoliberalism and Thatcherism?
I don't think I'm a Blairite Clintonian at all. I think the mistake they made was sort of what I discussed, the deregulation of business, the beginnings of a tolerance of monopoly and market power, and the idea this could solve all our problems if we, then taxed and redistributed later. That was the promise. I think that was when Hillary Clinton was defeated in 2016. I think that was the end of that. I'm not calling for that at all. I'm calling, for some, I want us, as I've said before, to be like the more, I think there's things about the 1950s, the United States that were very successful. I think the 19th century United States had a good economy. I think the Scandinavians and East Asia have had it right. So no, I'm not calling for a return to Clinton and Blair. I think they were too oblivious to the dangers of letting private power aggregate and hoping that all problems would solve themselves.
And you're somewhat of a Democratic insider. I mean, you talk to a lot of people. Are you seeing any responses to the last election and the future of the Democrats that you're sympathetic to? Are you seeing the ideas that you develop in this essay and you will do in the age of extraction? Are you seeing that in political terms?
I mean, I think that most of my friends from, I am a Democrat, I should make that clear. And, I'm sort of wearing, as an author, I think I'm sort of experimenting with ideas, but I'm, it's still at some level a former official. I think there is a lot of, deep thinking going on, much of it not in public, as to what is the winning formula. One of the lines of conversation is that, inflation destroyed everyone. And frankly, we ran the economy well and people made a lot of money and workers got gains for the first time, but we were destroyed by inflation. I don't think that's entirely wrong, but somehow, and this has been a problem, I was in the Obama White House too. There is a serious problem that the Democratic Party has with communicating to working class people that it's truly on their side and that it wants a balanced and fair economy. This GOP Congress is about to pass $4.5 trillion in tax cuts and, and cut Medicare, i.e., healthcare for poor people, and many of whom are in the red states, by 1.5 trillion or something. So it's a massive giveaway to the wealthy, stealing from the poor and giving to the rich. Somehow that's a popular move. And so there is, a crisis going on, and the Democratic Party needs to, I think in some ways, I think Bernie Sanders is the one who has been the most successful in just speaking to what people want and need, and staying on the fact that people fundamentally what they want from government is economic.
Well, much to discuss. Tim Wu, thank you so much. The author of The Real Road to Serfdom, fascinating essay in this month's issue or this quarterly's issue of Liberties. I know The Age of Extraction will be coming out, November, Tim?
Yep, in England and US same time.
Okay, well, we'll get you back on the show. Fascinating conversation, Tim Wu. Thank you so much. Keep well, and we'll talk again in the next few months.
Looking forward to it. Bye-bye.
Step on the scene, I'm ready to attack. Andrew Keane, yeah, he's the one to bash. Asking questions, no filter, just keeps on grinning. He's the man who's got the whole crowd spinning. Money, fame, success, it's all in his sight. He'll dig deep, expose you with all his might. No sugarcoating, he'll cut right through. Andrew King, he's the one to spew. Yeah, he's an expert.